the flow. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to introduce you to Rob Shimwell from Dialogue, OK? And the reason I'm getting him on is because due diligence, sweat equity, love that, cubicle farm and bruxism. Do you have any idea what any of those terms really mean? Well, some we hear daily, but seldom question, while others are bandied about in various professions as a way of explaining something. To you and I, it's just called jargon. And this week, a few people from across Wiltshire will be explaining their jargon, and you never know, we might just learn something from it. Well, let's begin on the basis of all this with Rob Shimwell, as I said. He's from the Swindon's Business Language School Dialogue. It's nice to see you, Rob. There is some jargon I would like to use right now for the fact that my song finished halfway through, but we'll leave that for another day. Welcome aboard. Now, instead of saying more bang for your buck, why don't we just simply say you're getting more for your money? Why do we do this?
Well, I think there are two or three aspects to the whole idea of jargon. Sometimes jargon exists for precision. Sometimes it exists for to show that you're a part of a particular group. And sometimes, quite frankly, jargon exists purely and simply because it's a new concept. The idea has never existed before, so we need to invent a new word to actually define what the new concept is. I'm thinking like spreadsheet.
Oh, yes.
Something
course,
as basic as that if you go back 15, 20 years and you'd said the word spreadsheet to me, I would have looked at you completely blankly as a jargon word because nobody had come across them before.
But now we use it all the time.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it makes its way. And, which professions, in your opinion, seem to have more jargon than others?
Again, I think some of the specialist industries, if you can call them industries, so the medical industry, that they would love to use the expression jargon insofar as it helps them with precision. So, for example, it might be a new disease, a new kind of technology that's helping them to understand things. The medical profession is one example. The legal profession is another. The one that I was thinking of the other day was cease and desist.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And you think, oh, come on, that's OTT. But when you break it down, cease means stop doing the activity. Desist is actually and not continue doing it in the future. So fair enough, precision, they've got to be very precise. I also tend to think that it's a bit of a hangover from the old days where the scriveners, the people who wrote legal documents, were paid per word. And consequently, the more words and the more jargon you could throw in there, the more money, I suppose, the scriveners would make.
That's right. And the point is, though, with all of this, is it to me, it sometimes feels that perhaps it could be a bit elitist, that perhaps some businesses want to use these big words because it kind of defines who they are and separates them from other people, especially if you're paying a lot of money to that profession for doing the job that it does.
Absolutely. There is very much that argument of if you don't understand what we're saying, you can't technically join our group, and therefore we can afford to lord it over you. But what I do find interesting, excuse me, is that we talk about legal jargon, medical jargon, but not necessarily if it was a car mechanic. They've got plenty of words that are not familiar with us, but we don't tend to say, oh, my car mechanic used a load of jargon the other day. I think there's a certain amount of intellectual snobbery about the whole thing sometimes.
Now, dentists use terms like occlusion, which is I've since discovered the relationship of our upper and lower teeth when the jaws are closed, apparently. That's what I've been told. I didn't know this. I've looked it up. Surgeons use things like bradycardia, which apparently is a slow heartbeat. I mean, of course, I suppose in the medical profession, a lot of it is Latin, I'm guessing.
Yes, absolutely. And it is defining something particular for giving the absolute precision that's required. You know, you could talk about your dental expression there for the occlusion, or you could use a 4 or 5 word sentence that does the same thing, but it's not half as efficient because you're having to say that gap between your teeth when your jaw is closed. Yeah. Whereas if you just use the word occlusion, we're all a lot easier. But I don't think it's just limited to professions. I think the idea that this idea of exclusivity in groups also refers to the old and the young. I don't think my children particularly think of using jargon, but in fact when they're using their expression, you take the word for a spot, that most teenagers are quite familiar with, they have their own jargon for spot, which might be zit, whereas the medical profession has its own jargon for spot, which is pustule or something along those lines. So it's not just got to be on the academic level. I think it's social groups as well.
Now, your business language school, tell us a bit about what you do, and does jargon feature much in the kind of thing that you offer?
Yeah, it does actually. And in fact, sometimes the more technical the language that's required from the student, the easier it is, because very often technical jargon is international anyway. And what you tend to find is if you're a spinal surgeon, something along those lines, you've got a finite vocabulary, a lexical set of words that you're going to use in your everyday language, which are recycled again and again and again. To you, the likes of you and me, sounds completely gobbledygook, but to them it is perfectly natural. And it's only when they get outside that jargon field that they struggle, because they've got to go and buy a box of washing powder down at the local supermarket. So in some respects, it's a lot easier to have a vocabulary that revolves around a particular, what we might consider, jargonistic set.
It can be quite scary. I mean, about a year ago, I had a hospital report. I was about to go and do some tests, and when it came, what happened was the report was sent to my doctor, and I got a copy of it. And I mean, reading that, the first thing I did was head off to the internet.
yes. Little knowledge is
typing these long words in and getting some really horrifying things back. I mean, it turned out that there was nothing wrong. Everything was going to be okay. Apart from, clearly, he needs something doing with his head. But apart from that, it was okay. But that's the problem, isn't it? It can be sometimes if the jargon is delivered to the wrong people, or in a way that you don't understand, it can be quite worrying or even dangerous.
Yes, absolutely. A similar example on the medical front. My brother-in-law, who's a dentist, had a slight scare in terms of a little mole on his head. It was a friend who actually helped him out in terms of the diagnosis, and he just sent him a quick text message just to let him know in advance, and just sent 2 letters, B9, and he was, oh my lord, is that worse than an A3 or a B4? And of course it was actually benign, which is a
right, okay, yes,
so
yes,
imagine, but again, knowledge in the wrong hands, or
little knowledge can be dangerous as well. Now, what about slang? How does that fit into the whole jigsaw puzzle?
Yeah, well, again, slang, I think really is about exclusivity. It says, if you don't understand my slang, the amount of times an adult tries to use a young person's expression and gets a very painful grimace from the son or daughter. That's certainly the big one there. I don't think it's very often particularly precision. Although, having said that, in terms of jargon, I was having an argument with my children the other day, the difference between seeing somebody, going out with somebody, and actually being somebody's partner or boyfriend. Apparently 3 different concepts that I'm not actually familiar with yet.
Okay, well, maybe you will be in time.
Yes,
we'll
one day.
Learn. How do we, as a country, the English language is full of very flowery language. It's very clever and all the rest of it, and you can have several words meaning the same thing and so on, or several words with different meanings. One word that means the same, it's got different meanings to it. But how does that work out in terms of how we compare to other countries? Are we slightly more overcomplicated in the UK compared to, or Britain, as we are than perhaps other parts of the world?
I think we are, because I think historically we've been invaded, first of all, so many times that we've got so many more influences, whether that's the French, whether that's the Latin, the German, the Vikings, all of those inputs, first of all, into our language. The second side of it as well is that I think we love playing with language in the UK. So going back to the precision, I'm very busy at the moment. I was teaching a Japanese gentleman, and I said, I've got a lot on my plate at the moment. And he just looked at me and he said, why can't you just say, I'm busy? Why do you have to bring in some great picture? Do you understand it? Yes, but it's not as efficient as it could be. And I think that's one of the things. We love images, we love metaphor, and we love playing with the language.
That's a really interesting point, isn't it? This is a fascinating conversation, it really is. And I don't think we've used too much jargon ourselves during the course of all this, have we? But thank you very much, Rob. I appreciate it. That's Rob Shimwell there from Dialogue, which is a business language school based in Swindon. And tomorrow we're going to be talking to somebody who uses a lot of, or has used a lot of jargon in their line of work. And it's Bob Gamble, who is a retired captain from Rawton. And he's an airline captain. So